So the Varna system there, what led to the fall of the Harappa system, the Varna system, how the society was segregated, then the Gurukul system of education, then what made Bharat, ancient Bharat, a economic superpower, and then what was security, foreign policy like in that era. So and like with us we have Souhardya Day. So I hope you said
Thank you
your
very
name
much.
correctly.
Th- Thank you very much for having me on the show, Amaya. And Rajas, it's really a pleasure to be here. And hello to all the viewers who are watching this. Namaste.
But Shaurya, can you please speak a few lines about yourself, what you do, and like because you will be the best person to do that, right?
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. I am Souhardya De. I'm a 17-year-old Indian author of historical fiction. I'm a columnist at the Sunday Guardian. I write on art and cultural topics, encompassing various dimensions of the Indian culture, from the very lesser known facts to topics which are widely talked about. But we leave most of, the very intricate details that I highlight through my columns. And then I'm a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland, to which I was elected in 2019. And I've been in all these years researching on various topics of the ancient Indian corpus as well, covering the literary texts like religious history, like Buddhism, Jainism, the era of Buddhism under the Pala Empire, the Harappan civilization, and so on. So I won the Rashtriya Bal Shakti Puraskar this year in 2021 from the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, and I am really glad to be here once again. Thank you so much, Amaya and Rajesh.
Our pleasure.
Well,
Our pleasure.
our pleasure. So the first question, the first topic we want to cover is what led to the fall of the Harappa system? So your take on that.
Yeah, so basically, there are various causes for the same. Like various historians have opined in various ways. So I will start from the name. There were two important cities in Harappa, like two important cities to be talking about in the IVC as a whole. So the first is
Yes.
Harappa, and the second is Mohenjo-daro. Now, Mohenjo-daro is
Right.
literally in Sindhi. It means mound of the dead. So coincidentally, I'm not talking about how the name came as an etymology, but coincidentally, when there was an expedition that was led in Mohenjo-daro, archaeologists excavated 37 skeletons, which were all kind of disfigured, and showed somehow the signs of an attack from foreign invasion kind of thing. But that is not how the name originated, to be very precise, because people might not take it that way. But then moving on to the fall of the Harappan civilization, there's also this ecological disbalance. Like various scholars were opined that there were earthquakes and there were floods, the change of the course of river Indus, and certain such other things that, especially the depletion of the resources of trees, that resulted in the losing of the fertility of the Harappan civilization, whose main occupation was agriculture and pastoralism, and which is why I think that the mature Harappan phase actually dwindled down to the late Harappan phase during that particular era. But then there's also the Aryan thing to be taken in mind, because the Aryan culture was newly introduced at that point of time. So you can also talk about the invasion scheme, you can talk about the ecological balance, but which I think is more appropriate for this purpose is the ecological balance, because the invasion scheme has really little archaeological evidence to assist the same.
Right.
Right.
Oh,
So
so Hardik, I had a follow-up question to that. So I had read this somewhere
Yeah,
that the Aryan invasion theory was a hoax. It was a
yeah.
propaganda by the British. Do you believe in that?
See, like I will be very honest with you. So the Harappan civilization, it had three phases. Now, if we look at it properly, like in as what historian Irfan Habib has opined in his book, The Indus Valley Civilization. So he has talked about these three phases that were present in the early Harappan phase. The first was the Kot Diji phase, the second was the Amri phase, and the third was the Sothi Siswal culture or phase. Now, each of these actually urbanized themselves in way more than what we can at this point elucidate, and in fact, it was these cultures that intermingled together to give rise to the mature Harappan phase, or what we basically call the Indus Valley civilization. Now, at the end of the at the end of the mature Harappan phase, or what is called prominently to be the Indus Valley civilization, we find this really interesting concept of the introduction of the Aryans, or a theory, as you stated. Like there is archaeological evidence to support the same. I'll be just giving you some details on that. But before that, I'll tell you somewhat about the Indus Valley civilization and the foreign relations during that time. In his book as well, Irfan Habib himself has opined about this civilization, which is the Helmand civilization in Afghanistan, located on the banks of river Harthawati and Oxus. And the Helmand civilization had this huge palace at Mundigak, and this famous site at Shahari Shokta. Now, this is Afghanistan. And after that comes the northwestern part of India, or what is Sapta Sindhu in the early Vedic period. In the early Vedic period, this region is called the Sapta Sindhu. And this is where the Harappans usually used to be in. Like, this is the major center for the Harappan civilization. It grew around this, around this center in a triangular formation. Now, if you talk about the introduction of the Aryans, if you look at it more closely, you will see that the Aryans and the Harappans shared a similar kind of pottery, that is the RBW, or the red blackware, during the later stages of the Harappan culture. And as the Harappan culture continued to decrease in its, what should I call it, in its uniqueness, like it lost its uniqueness. It merged somewhat with the Indus Valley civilization. I'm sorry, with the Aryan civilization that came after the Indus Valley civilization. So you will find the introduction of a new train of people whom we call the Vedic settlers, whom we call the Aryan settlers, in fact. Now, you can also note another point which has often been referred to in the Rig Veda. There are around 250 hymns dedicated to Lord Indra, who is often called Purandar and Jitendra, which literally means, the breaker of forts. Now, if you look at the Harappan civilization in the similar contrast, you won't find in the similar context, I'm really sorry, in the similar context, you won't find a lot of forts in the Harappan civilization. Like, they had huge buildings, but they did not have a lot of defense system or well-organized cavalry or something as such. But since the Aryan people have often referred to Indra as Purandar and Jitendra, it can be inferred that they actually entered from the Afghanistan portion, or what we today call the Helmand civilization, into the northwestern frontier. So it cannot be completely dismissed as a hoax. It cannot be completely dismissed as a hoax, what I opine, in fact. But you do have evidences for the same, but they contribute, lesser in amount when compared to the ecological disturbance. When we talk about the decline of the Harappan civilization, the contribution of the Aryan theory to the decline of the Harappan civilization is lesser than what is the contribution of the ecological disturbance theory to the same. So that is what I opine.
Wow, that's perfectly making, like, clearing a lot of my doubts. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Another follow-up question is, I didn't get you when you said the etymology of Mohenjo-daro. So can you please elaborate on that? What you meant by that?
Yeah. So sure. So, this follow-up question is very intriguing, to be honest. Like, but I'll be starting with another name. Not Mohenjo-daro, I'll be starting with Lothal. So Lothal, this etymology, this name has been derived out of a Gujarati word. And this also means the mound of the dead. So Mohenjo-daro is a Sindhi word that means the mound of the dead. And Lothal is also a Gujarati word. That means the mound of the dead. So these two sites have the similar meanings. If you look at the literal translations of the same in the local or the original languages, these are basically based on the local or the regional languages. Like, Lothal is located near the Gujarati area, or near the sea, the sea port. Lothal was a dockyard, we know. So it was located near the Arabian Sea, and the people in that area refer to that site as Lothal, or the Mound of the Dead. Similarly, Mohenjo-daro, which is currently in present-day Pakistan, it was located in an area where Sindhi was the main tongue of the local people. So, which is why I feel Mohenjo-daro has been used. Now, to be very honest, then there exists no scholarly consensus as to of the same yet, or as to how the etymology has been derived. But I'll just provide my opinion for the same. So, what I think the reason for such a name, by the nearby local residents might be is when John Marshall actually led an expedition. I mean, the second Mohenjo-daro expedition, if you look at it more carefully, after the one led by R.D. Banerjee, you would find that John Marshall in his accounts often stated that the local people referred to it as Mohenjo-daro. And Mohenjo-daro, when translated into English, literally means the mound of the dead. So that is when we came to know it as the mound of the dead or the stack of the dead or whatever you call it. But then there's also contradictory theory to the same, which has been opined by a great local scholar, by a great regional scholar, Sikandar Hulliya, who's an Indian. And he says that Mohenjo-daro does not mean the mound of the dead, but rather it means that the village of fishermen, and that their main occupation after agriculture and pastoralism had been fishing, and so-called Mohenjo-daro. So moving on to now, there's also an interesting part which has been coincidentally added to this name, as I sometime earlier stated. This is a bit of a horrid part where you would see that excavations have actually revealed some 37 skeletons that are currently being attributed to some kind of an outward Aryan invasion, which I was so long talking about, as a resultant massacre. But I don't really think that this has any part to play in the naming, just that things are often related. So this is what I think is all about the etymology part, like the name being originated out of the original language, but the original language, the context in which the name has been used, not being clear to scholars as of today, since there exists various theories about the same.
Right. Sure, Ramesh.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's great. So, like with that, so the second thing I want to ask you is the Varna system, right? So many people misunderstand Varna system to be, a system based on religion, or they argue many things. But so let's separate the grain from the chaff, right? So
Yeah.
please.
Sure. So before diverging in detail into the Varna system, I would like to make something clear to the viewers who are currently viewing. Caste and Varna are not the entirely same thing. So although the use has now been, generalized and popularized by most scholars and academics, caste, when seen in the Hindu standards, literally translates to jati, a concept that is entirely different to and at times a subsidiary of the Varnashrama. For instance, talking about the caste system, for instance, among the Brahmins, which is a Varna, the highest Varna in fact, Kulina Brahmin is a jati or a caste. So, and also, Utkala Brahmin, which is the regionalized caste or jati. So hence it is to be kept in mind that every Varna has a separate hierarchy of jatis, and that not all castes under the Brahmana Varna enjoy equal dominance in the society. So for that purpose, I would like to refer to the Varna system as the class-based division. CLAS is class-based societal division. Now, moving on to
Right.
the question, well, if you're talking about the Hindu society as a whole, it is somewhat vast to state, but I'll try to put out as much info as I can. So, in the beginning of this Varna system, specifically the fourfold Varna order, it started way back when Purusha Shukta, or the hymn 10.90 of the Rig Veda, was composed. Now, there's this quote that beautifully says, although I don't know if I'm quoting it exactly because I don't have this quote with me at the current moment, but I'm still trying to say it as much as I can remember. So there was this quote that said, I am a poet, my father is a physician, and my mother grinds corns on stone, or something as such. So being of the same family, the poet says, we are engaged in different professions. So what does this say about the early Vedic society? Well, simply, that the society had an occupational division of the Varna order, which, however, became rigid and somewhat determined by birth in the later Vedic period. So if you look at the early Vedic period, you would find that three members of the family, as detailed by the poet in Purusha Shukta. The poet himself is a poet, or a poet seer, as you might call him. His father is a physician, or a Vaidya, and his mother grinds corns and stones. So the three members of the family are employed in three different professions. One is writing the Rig Veda, so he can be considered to be somewhat of a philosopher or the Brahmana Varna. His father is a physician, to be taken into the Vaishya order, and his mother, who grinds corns and stone, to be taken into Shudra order or something as such, because Shudras were generally agriculturists. Now, in the later Vedic period, this became too much of rigidity and was determined by birth. For you no longer were permitted to choose your own Varna. Now, with the introduction of there's another important factor to be taken into mind. Why and how the Varna system became so rigid. So with the introduction, of the Mimamsa school of ancient Indian philosophy
Hmm.
among the Shat Darshana, the six popular schools that exist. Uh,
Right.
this Mimamsa, by Mimamsa I mean Purva Mimamsa and not Uttar Mimamsa. So there are two Mimamsa schools. I'm talking about the first one, that is Purva Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa, or the earlier Mimamsa school. Now, this Mimamsa school actually deepened the idea of Brahmanas to be the most superior of all societal elements, and people actually came to regard them as the supreme, next to God entity. Now, these four Varnas, if I go into a little bit of detail, were mainly the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras. So it's very clear from the name that the Brahmanas were the priests and the philosophers, the Kshatriyas were the warriors and the kings, and the Vaishyas were the merchants and the civil servants. The civil servants, however, they later became the Kayastha community in Bengal. And the fourth Varna was the Shudra, or the slaves and the agriculturists. The first three, that is Vaishya, to some extent, could read the Vedas and have Upanayana ceremony or the sacred thread ceremony for themselves. But there was another Varna introduced in the later part of the later Vedic age. There was another caste, to be honest, the outcasts basically, that evolved much later, but it basically included the Chandals and the Doms, whose works were associated with dead bodies, funeral pyres, and corpses, and they were ostracized from this main Vedic society as such. Now, I will be moving on a bit to since you asked me about the Hindu Varna society, I'll be moving on to the early Mauryan phase as well, Mauryan class division, where Megasthenes, who was the Greek ambassador sent by Seleucus to India, has a lot to say. So, from what I read, in the translations provided by J.W. McCrindle, who translated the Indica of Megasthenes into English, although the Indica
Hmm.
has been available in fragments throughout history. So, Megasthenes details us on 7 particular sections or varnas of the society. The first, he says, is formed of collective body of the philosophers, which in point of number is inferior to all of the classes, but in point of dignity is preeminent over all. So this is basically the Brahmana Varna, if we can relate to the Vedic system. And the second caste consists of the husbandry, or the people, the agriculturists and the pastoralists, who appear to be far more numerous or more in number than the other varnas combined. So, being moreover, what is more important to be noted down here, as translated by translated by J.W. McCrindle, is that this Varna was exempted from fighting and other public services, and they devoted their entire life to tillage. And even if there would be a war, they would not come over to a husbandman or destroy him or do him any harm. For men of these class were regarded as public benefactors and were protected from all injury. The third Varna consisted of the Nethers and the shepherds, and in general, it was the herdsmen, the pastoralists, who neither settled in towns nor in villages, but lived in like nomads, traveling from one place to the other. The fourth caste consisted of the artisans and the craftsmen, who were also at times patronized by the royal order. And the fifth caste is the military one. The fifth caste is the military, that is basically consisting of all the lower classes of the military order, like generals and in the present context, like not
Hmm.
generals and commanders, but
Chieftains.
lieutenants, majors, and everyone that comes under them. Yeah, the leaders of their own regiments. The sixth is the
Hmm.
civil servant and the overseer. And the seventh caste consists of the councillors and the assessors, who are in the present context the top bureaucrats. And here there come the military generals and commanders who advise the kings in the functioning of the state. So this above idea, as I earlier stated, has been quoted from J.W. McCrindle's translation of Indica by Megasthenes. So it's somewhat derived out of the same.
Hmm.
So this is what I opine about the Varna system in the Hindu society as a whole, taking it as an evolutionary phase from the Vedic age to the Mauryan phase.
Right, right. So, Shaurya, so I have a question for that. So, I mean, I read some article which says that the Bhagavad Gita had some verse in it that said that one person can shift from one varna to one more based on what work he does, right? And not,
Right.
I mean, one person is not restricted to only that varna. So,
Yeah, sure. So, see, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is actually a holy philosophical text of the ideal Varna system to be followed in the society. But if you look at it, it is somewhat, what we do in science. Like there's a theory and there's a practical application. Bhagavad Gita can be taken to be a theoretical part. The practical application was mainly done by the Brahmanas. It was dictated by the Brahmanas, and it was as such indoctrinated into the people. And as such, the Brahmanas used to keep their monopoly. They always used to have their monopoly in matters of class divisions, and used to keep themselves at the forefront of everything, even in cases of advising the kings. Now, what you are talking about is actually entirely true. Like as I said, in the Rig Veda as well, there's this shift of varna, because when a person, suppose, let's take for an example, an agriculturist who's working in the fields has been called to serve his king during a time of a war, and in that case he'll be regarded to as a kshatriya when he is warring against his enemy, since he's protecting his
Right.
motherland from
Hmm.
an enemy invasion. So for that purpose, he's a kshatriya, he's a warrior, and not an agriculturist. At least in terms of what has been said in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Purusha Sukta verses of the Rig Veda. So basically, occupation varies. For example, today someone might be studying law. Tomorrow he might be a big entrepreneur. So in that way, the occupation varies. And similarly, in that context, if you're talking about the Bhagavad Gita, the occupation varied, and as a result, any person, even if that be a purohita, if he joins the army as such, he would be regarded to as a kshatriya during times of war, and not as a purohita. So that is what you mean by the shifting one system. Yeah.
Right. So,
Hmm.
so with this, yeah. So, Rajesh, you want to add something?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question to that. I had two, three questions. I mean, this
Sure.
is so interesting, and you are so erudite, man. I mean, first of all, I take a bow from me.
Thank you.
Secondly, the
Thank you so much.
follow-up question,
Humbled.
right? So, I just wanted to get to know more about the six schools that you mentioned. One of them being Mansa. So, can you elaborate on what were they exactly?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, see, when let's take let's take a starting point. The starting point is the Hindu philosophy. So the Hindu philosophy has been interpreted differently by the various scholars that came. So, for example, suppose there was this, we have heard a lot about the Shruti and the Smriti type of literature that prevailed in the ancient India. So the Shruti was basically by
Hmm.
remembrance. By oral dictations, and the Smriti was by
Right.
remembrance. So
Hmm.
as the scholars transferred their knowledge orally or through the means of Shruti to their disciples, they were various disciples. Suppose two or three disciples. They used to interpret it in various ways. As a result, this gave rise to the Shat Darshana schools of ancient Indian philosophy. So I'll just tell you the names of all these six schools and detail somewhat on what they actually believe in. So the first school,
Hmm.
which is the oldest, in fact, is the Samkhya school of view. And the Samkhya school was propagated by the Kapila Muni. Kapila Muni is a very famous name in ancient Indian literature as well as in the Suryavanshi literature. If you look at it, the Dasaswamed, there was this king Sagara in the Suryavanshi dynasty, whose 10,000 sons were burned to ashes by Kapila Muni, for which Bhagirath, who was his descendant, had to pray to Lord Mahadeva to bring down Ganges to purify their sins. And as a result, Ganges came down and was called as Bhagirathi. So I just went to a
Hmm.
different trail. Now, coming back to the schools of philosophy, Kapila Muni wrote this Nyaya Sutra. So the basic philosophy of the Samkhya school was divided into two categories by the end of the 4th century AD. So the first was the old Samkhya view, or the original view, and the second was the new Samkhya view. Here, the idea of Dvaitavad, or the Purusha and the Prakriti was first propagated. So the old Samkhya view was a scientific view. It said that nature is everything that is required to form or to begin the universe with, and end it with as well. But in the new Samkhya view, there came a different thing, that is the Purusha. It became added with the Prakriti to give rise to the universe. Now, Purusha is basically the spiritual part of nature, and Prakriti is the creative agency that you're taking into consideration while the formation of the universe has been taken into account. This was later the concept of Dvaitavad, as pressed by Madhavacharya during the Bhakti movement. And moving on to the second view, that was the that was the yoga school of philosophy, and it was propagated by in the Yoga Sutra. So we have this International Yoga Day on 21st. I think it's coming really soon. So we're talking about yoga
Right.
philosophy here. So that's really relatable. Yeah. So Patanjali, he wrote this Yoga Sutra, and he prescribed certain norms for the same. So the first is you need to have yama, or which is self-restraint, or you need to restrain yourself from certain desires that will lead you to the path of ultimate salvation or mukti, which is the ultimate destination for each of these 6 schools.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
no
was
issues.
having some problem in my throat. Yeah. So basically, moving on to the norms set in the yoga school of philosophy that leads one to mukti or moksha. There are
Hmm.
basically 7 kind of stages. So the first, as I said, is yama, or self-restraint. That is
Right.
to free yourself from all desires, which has also been stated in Buddhism.
Hmm.
The second, you come to niyama, where you set rules and regulations for yourself, like a routine for yourself that you would follow to actually to actually attain yama. Like so I'll give you a practical illustration of this. For
Hmm.
example, if someone says that I want to wake up from 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, I need to
Right.
set a routine for the same, right? I need to set an alarm at
Hmm.
the previous night. So this is what is meant by the niyama. And you wake up at 6 a.m., that's your success. It's yama. So after this, there's pratyahara. In pratyahara, you sit down in a asana position. There are various asanas like chakrasana. There's also simple asanas, but you sit down in an asana position, especially the padmasana, which is to be followed during meditation, and and you fix your mind on one particular object, or one particular divinity that you think you are most attached to, and that is called pratyahara. What you do in the next step comes is dharna, where you try to focus your mind, other than the worldly desires or things, upon that particular object you have focused in pratyahara. You have chosen the object in pratyahara, you're focusing on that object in dharna. Then there is dhyana. You enter into the meditation stage, and you can see nothing else but the object which is in front of you. The ultimate stage that comes after, at the end of dhyana, is samadhi. Samadhi is the liberation of purusha from prakriti, and what you have in
Hmm.
yourself is the ultimate knowledge or enlightenment kind of thing, and uh,
Hmm.
it is how you attain mukti, or it is how you attain salvation. So this is the yoga school. Now moving on to the next school, which was rational in its thinking and propagated the idea of logical analysis and thinking, which was also called Nyayavada in the Jainism terms, or in the Jain concept. This school was called
Hmm.
Nyaya School of Ancient Indian Philosophy, and it was propagated by Rishi Gautama, as he wrote it down in the Nyaya Sutra. So here also I'll give you a practical example. For example, suppose you see a wildfire in front of you. You see a forest burning, and you see smoke coming out of it. So you can infer that there is fire in the forest, right?
Hmm.
And as
Right.
a result of which there's a lot, as a result of which there are fumes emanating out of the forest. So, what you can conclude from this is, since there is fire in the forest, and since out of the fire smoke is coming out, so wherever there is fire, there is smoke. So, this is how you get to your conclusion. So, there are 3 steps for the same. The first is the pratyaksha, the second is the anuman, and the third is the shabda. So pratyaksha is basically inference, like you inferred that the jungle was burning and that there is fire, and out of the fire there's smoke that coming out. The second is
Hmm.
anuman, which is you have to guess, like what exactly is, you have to think it to yourself. You have to form logical thinking, and you have to analyze it critically, and you have to find out what exactly is happening, what your conceptual understanding about the particular happening is. For example, in this case, in the example I stated, it is that everywhere, wherever there is fire, there is, smoke. Wherever there is fire, there is smoke. So this is what you have inferred from the above said condition. The third, or the ultimate stage of understanding, is Shabda. Shabda is basically actual hearing from trusted sources. For example, in the present day, we take, Wikipedia, Britannica, and lots of newspapers, the Hindu, the Indian Express, the Guardian, the New York Times, to refer to whatever we have to study and note down for our examinations, right? So in that case, that is what we mean by Shabda. So you are hearing that particular incident from a trusted source, which you can use in your presumption. So this is the Nyaya concept.
Right.
After the Nyaya comes the Mimamsha, after the Nyaya comes the Vaisheshika school of philosophy. Vaisheshika is the school of philosophy that gave origin to chemistry and physics as we know it today. So here you find Rishi Kannada, who first propagated the idea of Anu, or the smallest particle atom, the indivisible Anu, in his Vaisheshika Sutra, which we have in detail studied in the lower classes of school. After that, so this is how you find, from the Vaisheshika school, you find physics and chemistry to be originating. So it is also a rationalistic school of philosophy, and it believes in the idea that God is your spiritual guide who will be leading you to hell or heaven based on the karmas that you perform throughout your life. And after that, there comes what I call the Purva Mimamsha, or the Purva Mimamsha school, or the previous Mimamsha school of philosophy. And this Purva Mimamsha was basically propagated by Rishi Jamini, Sabada Swami, and Kumarila Bhatta. And it stressed on the importance of Brahmins in the societal division. Like, if it is not for Brahmins, a common man won't be able to interpret the texts as has been written down in the Vedas and the sacred scriptures, and you won't be able to form a correct conclusion out of it. So this is why the Brahmin's position became dominant in the society, as I have talked about earlier, in my inference of Indica and the Vedic society when I was talking about the pre-Mauryan phase. But coming into the ultimate school of ancient Indian philosophy, it is basically the Uttara Mimamsha, or the Vedanta school. So Vedanta in literary terms signifies the end of Vedas, which is because it forms the last part of the literary corpus that the Vedic civilization has given us, and the rest of them are, only simple interpretations, as has been said by the sages. But here, the Vedanta school, which was originally started by Bhadrayan in his Brahma Sutra, and later taken up by Shankaracharya, Ramanuja, and the other Bhakti saints of medieval India. So this school talks about the idea or the concept of scriptures and rituals and rites, as has been stated in the Upanishads. So they do not go into much detail in the Vedas, but they follow the Upanishads as a general scriptural evidence for whatever idea you are basing yourself on. So this scriptural evidence is called as pramana. So what is the basic difference between these 6 schools of Indian philosophy is that their pramanas, or their source of knowledge, is completely different. But their ultimate goal is the same. Their ultimate goal is similar, which is basically to bring about, mukti or moksha, to help you attain mukti or moksha, to help you attain salvation, and to free you from the cycle of births and rebirths. So that is what I think is about, all about the 6 schools of ancient Indian philosophy. But to be very honest, I defined them very briefly. So there is a lot to be said about these 6 schools. Like, you can go on for an hour on each of these schools, but since time is limited with us, so I just analyzed them in brief. So I hope that was okay.
Yes, yes. So I want to ask you one thing. So regarding Shabda, as you said, relying on sources which are authentic. So do you think that relying on media houses like the Hindu, the Guardian, I mean, are they really authentic? Because I mean, every media nowadays, they have some opinion, right? So I mean, they may not always be
See,
authentic.
right, exactly. So if we try to analyze, well, I just said that because I wanted to form a practical explanation for people who would not be able to understand it in the philosophical terms. But these two are entirely different concepts. Like, when you're talking about Shabda, it's usually a trusted source. For example, a king's edict, or a servant of the king who has, informed you something. And even that might be, have certain, kind of, what should I call it, discrepancies within the same. But if you look at Shabda in more detail, you would see it's not relying on a single evidence. It's actually taking into consideration a lot of evidence, like conducting a general survey before forming your opinion. So we still conduct surveys, right? We still conduct surveys. We still have polls before we come to a conclusion. At least, last week, I think last week in Bengal, while they were cancelling the board examinations, they had this poll. They asked people their opinions. They asked their opinions as to whether the exams should be conducted and in what form, and if not, why they should be cancelled. So this is what you mean by Shabda. Now, talking about these newspapers like the Guardian, then the New York Times. Well, I must say that. Most of the newspapers or the media houses that exist today are biased to one form of ideology or the other. You will see them either criticizing one particular political ideology, or going into or supporting verily the other political ideology. So I wouldn't delve much into politics. I would just say that, well, when you're forming an opinion on the basis of the Shabda, as has been stated by the ancient Indian schools, you're going to do a survey, a generalized survey, where you're taking into account people's opinions before you're forming your conclusion. Yeah.
Right. Great. So not merely relying on one source, but relying on a host of sources. So that's
Empirical
great.
data.
So,
Right.
Empirical science.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the method of logical reasoning, right? So the component.
Right.
So I want to ask you about. So how did they? So what was the education system like to kind of teach that logical reasoning? So this is when we come to the Gurukul system of education.
Yeah, exactly. So as you said it already, so the Vedic system, the Vedic literary corpuses they provide for the Gurukul system of education, which basically means the sacred rite of passage to all individuals. And if you look at it carefully, it usually starts when you attain teenage, like from 10 to 12, and then it continues until the age of 25. Which this period has been already stated in the Jabali Upanishad, neatly observed in the fourfold life stage differentiation, where you have brahmacharya, grihastha, then vanaprastha, and then sannyasa. So brahmacharya is this stage where you are going to a gurukul and you are being educated in the arts, in the sciences, etc. Now gurukulas, they were usually sponsored or supported by the royals, and in this, there were usually some great literary scholars or philosophers of their times. For example, we've seen in the Mahabharata, there's Dronacharya, who used to teach in a gurukul. There were also other saints, like Dronacharya was related to Kripacharya, who's also a great saint in the court of the Hastinapura king. Now, it is also incorrect to think that the students would only practice yajnas and rituals and rites, as many have thought in their scholarly consensus, as I have gone through various works where they have said that Gurukula education in the ancient times provided for the practice of the yajnas and the rituals and the rites. That's completely incorrect. That's not the case. Now, if you're looking at Mahabharata itself, you would see that they had martial arts, they had Gada Vidya, they had Dhanura Vidya, Shilpa Vidya as well, and everything else you would find in normal school. Just that they are based on the scriptural texts. So the Hindu scriptural text, I would say, unlike Islam or Christianity, is not based on a single literary source. For example, in Islam, it's the Holy Quran. In Christianity, it's the biblical text that you mostly refer to, the Old Testament and the New Testament. But in Hinduism, you have a lot to refer to. You have to study the Vedas, you have the Vedangas, you have the Upavedas, you have so many subdivisions, you have the Upanishads. You go on and you find individual texts, for example Manucharita, and you have so many to study, so that you cannot form an exact idea of how the Hindu system is going to work. So for that purpose, I would say, each of these, for example, if I talk about Dhanur Vidya, we had a separate Veda, Upaveda for that, which is a Dhanura Veda. If you're talking about Ayur Vidya, which is the study of medicines, it is a Upaveda of the Rig Veda. It is called Ayurveda. The Veda is called Ayurveda. So similarly, there's Gandharva Veda and there's Shilpa Veda. But of course, Al-Biruni, who was a medieval traveler, early medieval traveler, had stated later that the society became absorbed, and the study of the sciences especially became absorbed in astrology and orthodoxy by the early medieval times. The payment, however, was usually by Guru Dakshina, even during the early medieval times, starting from the ancient times, as has been followed through the evolutionary process. But pupils, there were two kinds of pupils who used to study under the guru. Pupils who could pay something as such, for example, princes and and members of the royal family or nobility. Take, for example, a fight for your guru, as is seen in the Mahabharata, where the Pandavas and the Kauravas wage wars against Drona's childhood friend Drupada when asked by Drona as a guru dakshina. But then they would pass successfully, and those who were too poor to service as such were expected to do some personal service to their guru and guruma in their own homes by staying, as has been seen, like in the ancient ages. I forgot to state this particular point. The children usually, they were sent to their guru's residence, where they had to live with their guru, they had to work with their guru, and they had to study under the guidance of their guru. So that is how you're forming the educational system in the ancient India, in the Indian age, like period. Yeah.
Right. So regarding that, so how did that educational system help to create a strength, not only mental but also intellectual, which ultimately helped Bharat, which was a economic superpower. So yeah.
Yeah, so talking about this economic superpower, I would like to clarify a statement first, like in justification of what you said. Like Pliny, who's a famous Roman statesman, once said that India actually drained Rome of all its gold resources. And another interesting event here was the establishment of frequent trade relations between the Pala and the Chola Empire with the Chinese, so much that the Chinese had to put a bar on how much money they would actually use for purchasing foreign goods. So you can imagine the extent of trade India carried out, But now, since you're talking about the educational system that helps students in garnering knowledge, I would give you certain instances. For example, in the early medieval times, there was this. There were various literary works where people, they used to, philosophers especially, they used to detail one on the geographical extent of India as well. So if you look at the Vedic system, the Vedas as well, the Rig Veda talks about the Sapta Sindhu region. Now, coming to the later Vedas, they talk about this portion in the, the Gangetic Valley, the upper Gangetic Valley and the lower Gangetic Valley, and the division of the Mahajanapadas that came later. So you are getting to learn polity, you are getting to learn geography, you have a knowledge about philosophy, you also have a knowledge about the martial arts, as I stated earlier, like Dhanur Vidya from Dhanur Veda. You have a knowledge of medicine from like Ayur Vidya, the knowledge of medicine from Ayurveda. You have a knowledge of music, like musical knowledge from Gandharva Veda, and then there's the Shilpa Veda. You have knowledge of rites and rituals. So you basically whatever, like in the current times, we have this stream choosing. Like we can choose the streams we prefer, we can keep the subjects we prefer, and then move on to study the texts or the books which have been written in the same in the subject, which come under the parasol of that subject. So similarly, in that particular age, in the ancient age, so people had different literary texts for whatever they wanted to study. And if you are the first one to study something, then you are going to write a literary text for that. Since the people who are going to come after you, they're going to follow what you have written, in the literary text. So that is how I think the entire procedure was followed like. And so it is incorrect to think that it would actually be giving rise to only Brahmanas in the society and not warriors, because as we have seen in all the instances I have earlier stated, warriors in fact were also trained in Gurukulas. Like all the Pandavas and the Kaurava princes, they were trained in Dronacharya's Gurukula. So all were the disciples of Dronacharya. Whereas Dronacharya himself was a good warrior. Like we've seen, Dronacharya led the Kauravas in the Kurukshetra, Dharmic Kurukshetra war after the death, after the fall of Bhishma. So you can take for an instance that people, they had varied talents. They were multifaceted people during that point of time. If they studied all these different literary texts. But well, if you would like to focus on one particular text, if you suppose in a society someone wants to be a Rajana or a Rajan, as in a king, or an advisor to the king, then for that purpose you have Niti Sara by Kamandaki. You have Chanakya's Arthashastra. You're going to study that. You're going to understand how the entire polity works. You also have various other texts for the same. I just stated two important texts. So you have a lot of them, for instance. And so you get a brief idea. You get to form an idea of how you got to, how you got to function and how you are going to effectuate your duties in the official position. Similarly, in the case of Vaishyas, although it is very important to remember that Vaishyas, they had to often rely on the waters and on their practical knowledge rather than on the philosophical or the theoretical knowledge. For often at times you've seen the Vaishyas of the trading class, they had to go on long voyages. Since India is a peninsula, subcontinent, it has waters on all three sides. So they used to go towards the Arabian side. They often used to go towards the South Asian side as well, and from there to China. So they often so they had to often rely on these southwestern monsoons and the retreating northeast monsoons, and the trade winds, the ITCs, that is intertropical convergence zone. So these are geographical terms. They had to rely on practical geography rather than on philosophical doctrine. So if you look at the geographical, if you look at the geographical part of philosophy, especially during the early medieval age, it had, corrupted to, it had restrained itself only to Munjavar. So it asked people not to venture outside where the munja grass grew, and this generally means they asked people to limit themselves towards within the basic frameworks of India. Now, I will give you another instance. For example, if you are okay, so that's a part of polity and diplomacy as well. If you talk about the Indian diplomacy that is followed today, S. Jaishankar, who's our current foreign minister, he had in a Raisina Hills dialogue in 2019 clearly stated that India is a prisoner of its past image. So what he meant by this was that let's look at Chanakya's Arthashastra and Niti Sara by Daki, carefully. You would find that if I may go on the same, can I just elucidate on these points?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. So if you look at Chanakya's Arthashastra, for instance, you would find that the basic qualities of diplomats and the three basic kinds of diplomacy. The first is the personal diplomacy, where a diplomat or an ambassador of the king used to go to another one's court and used to actually show the personal benevolence, the personal the prowess of the king, of the king's court he came from. So that's called personal diplomacy. So that's a physical attribute, the physical and a psychological attribute of the king himself that used to cause fear within his enemies. The second is you used to be a diplomat. You used to serve your state in the sense that you were serving it as by, for example, someone used to go into one particular and state and they used to show how much powerful the state's military is. That's called hardcore diplomacy. You used to threaten those states. For example, during the Sadvahana period, the ambassador sent by Gautamiputra Satakarni towards the Shaka kings in the northwest, they just went about and they just informed the Shaka kings about the grandeur of the military strength that Gautamiputra Satakarni possessed. One that was enough to actually defeat the Yavanas or the Greeks, as they were called in the Indian terms. Then there's also the soft power diplomacy. So what is soft power diplomacy is you go as an ambassador to some king's court, you stay there for a while, you try to understand the weak, the very weak points of that particular state, like where to hit to basically capsize a fort. So that is called soft power diplomacy. So diplomats being sent as spies, in fact. A policy USA widely follows to keep its unilateral theory in process in the present world. For example, if you look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, USA actually sent its diplomats, as CIA agents, and then they took photographs of the Russian ballistic missiles being prepared on that particular, near that particular state. I mean nation, in that particular nation, with the help of the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, now talking about Niti Sara by Kamandaki, which I think is an excellent example of how the Indian diplomacy works even today. So you would see that Niti Sara provides us on the 7 important qualities of a diplomat, which include having a strong personal ability. I mean, having a good communication capability, then having the basic requirement of expressing your ideas clearly, being able to threaten your opponent when time requires so, being able to restrain all those kinds of intoxicants and the other malpractices that prevail in the society. So since you're a diplomat, you represent the state. Now, if you indulge in malpractices that would actually falter the reputation of your state. So, there's a funny statement that was once said by a fine expert on international relations, Pavneet Singh, in his book International Relations. He has stated that Rama in Ramayana, Hanumana, who was sent as Rama's ambassador to Lanka, to Sita, in fact, but also gave a message to Ravana. And Bibhishana also talked about the diplomatic immunity over there. Like, Hanumana cannot be killed because he is an ambassador. So Pavneet Singh, he funnily quoted that Hanuman hence is the first ambassador, first diplomat of India to Sri Lanka. So that is how you come about an entirely, so that is what I was actually trying to say. Like, Hinduism is not only restricted, like the Hindu texts are not only restricted to the scriptural, the ritualistic parts. It has got lots in it. Like, scholars in the Hindu scholars have opined Hindu philosophy is wide and is widespread. Like, it encompasses everything, ranging from literature, it encompasses polity, it encompasses administration and diplomacy, and everything else that you would like to note, even in the present world. So that is why I think even one particular field of education might be able to help a student to garner knowledge about every particular field when you are in a Gurukula type of system. So yeah.
Wow. This couldn't have been more elaborate than this. And I just have
Thank
one
you.
question. Souhardya, I mean, this is not. I'll come back to what you have said. I have a few follow-ups, but this is apart
Yeah.
from that. I just wanted to know how much time did it take to garner this knowledge that you have? How many books did you read, and how many months, weeks, years did it take?
Well, I have been reading, to be very honest, from class 5. When I was in class 5, I started reading all these Hindu texts.
Wow.
I do not read them in proper Sanskrit. I read them in translations by, for example, if you're talking about the Vedas, they have been translated by a famous scholar, that is Ralph T. Griffith, R.T. Griffith. So he has this entire literary corpus, which is found in Oxford University's Bodleian Library. You have, then as I said, there's J.W. McCrindle, who has translated Megasthenes' accounts into in English. So you get to know so much, like, as I said, in all of these deliberations of mine, like, you have so much of knowledge encompassing under the literary text. Like, you get to know about the polity, organization, about the administrative features, about the social religious system that prevailed during the time the text was written. So basically, these texts, why I feel interested to read them is because they serve as cultural mirrors to the past, to the age they had been written in, and also at times they portray the opinions of the scholars who had written them. For example, if you read Nyaya Sastra, you would understand how Kapila Muni used to think. So that is what I find most fascinating about reading these texts. And if you also, but before starting these texts in detail, one has to, I think, it would be better if one goes through the simplified versions that have been provided by R.S. Sharma, then by D.N. Jha, Satish Chandra, and the other historians. So they have simplified it to a lot extent. For example, the international relations expert I was talking about, Pavneet Singh. So he has simplified it to a very he has simplified it too much. So when you study that simplified form of international relations, you get to understand, you get to have that basic concept within you, and as a result of which, when you study that in detail, you can relate to that particular thing you have already indoctrinated into yourself. So yeah, that is what I think about it.
So is there someone in your family also related to history, or was it self-love or self-discovered love for the
Yeah.
subject?
No, actually, my grandfather, in fact, he was a professor of history. My father himself is a professor of history, and I have lots of professors of history in my family. My uncle is a professor of history. My aunt is a professor of history. My mom is a teacher of history. So everyone is history. So you can consider that it's a family, family heredity type kind of thing. So it's inherited, if you look at
Wow,
it that way.
Wow.
great.
So, within the family, you must have so much knowledge, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
much
and most
knowledge
importantly,
in.
so many books to refer to.
Yes,
Yeah, and
Yeah,
most
yes.
right.
importantly, so many books to refer to. Like, everyone has got their own library kind of thing. So yeah.
So what are your future plans now? You plan on becoming a professor, or what's the plan? Writing books, or what is it?
Yeah, actually, I want to be a civil servant, so I want to be in the foreign service, which is why I was talking so much about diplomacy. Nevertheless, yeah, but writing book is in it. It's a separate part. Like anyone can write books. To be very
Mm-hmm.
honest, when you have certain views to express, you can write books. So I am currently, I have one book upcoming from Rupa Publications India. So I signed this up with Rupa last year in 2020. I mean, in July most probably. Yeah, so it's been 1 year actually, and the book hasn't yet come out. So it's basically on the Battle of Malwa. Akbar's foster brother Adham Khan and his lust for the queen of Malwa, Rupmati, and the battle between with Bas Bahadur and Bas Bahadur fleeing away to Khandesh. So that's medieval Indian history, and it's historical fiction genre. And I am writing one more at the present moment. So I also organize this podcast called Cosmography of the Greco-Romans, the Egyptians, and us, where I talk about the similarities that persisted between the Greco-Roman culture and civilization, the Egyptian civilization and the Indian civilization, and it has ranked well, to be honest, 47th on Apple Billboard rankings. I mean, Apple rankings
Wow.
like in the Indian history category. And well, so these are what I'm planning for the moment. Like I want to continue them, but most importantly, I'm in the final year of my school, so well, I've got to, I got to get to studying, and I have a lot to study, in fact, like a lot of assignments and a lot of study materials to be completed. And then there's this examination, the ISCs in 2022. Then there's also the uni application. So there's a lot of, I'm kind of stressed up nowadays. So yeah.
Wow. I
You
mean, so at least as of now, the school assignments must be a cakewalk for you, right? I mean, having studied a lot of history and then writing those small
There's
assignments
at
would
least
be.
one subject in which you are getting an A plus for
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, of course, history assignments are interesting to me. But then, as I said earlier, I do not specifically have an interest in history. Like I have varied interests, I have diverse interests. So I study polity as well, I study geography as well. So yeah, so I try to cover as much as I can, especially
Right.
in the school standards.
So, like, also one thing is that, so since you have a lot of knowledge, since you have read many books about those areas, then so
I'm
if
humble to
you,
hear that.
No, no.
yeah, I
You
mean,
have
no doubt. I mean, nobody would argue
no doubt.
otherwise. So, if you become a servant, if you become a civil servant, then, what are the one or two things which, you would learn from the past to kind of apply.
See, since I'm interested in becoming a diplomat, like I have an inclination towards the Indian culture, and what I would like to learn from the past, basically. So, do you want to ask me like what etiquettes or what civil service professional capabilities I want to learn from the past, or is it just like what I am interested in the past that would help me garner experience for civil service?
Both actually.
Sure. Okay. So, if you're talking about the experiences, I mean, that a civil servant has, so if you would notice, there is this very important term in civil service. This is called ethics. So, when you're talking
Hmm.
about the ethical standards, they are mostly taken from the conventional Indian philosophies. They have been set by the Indian legends. For example, luminaries, philosophical luminaries. For example, Swami Vivekananda. He forms a very important part in the ethical preparations, and Vivekananda is actually the propagator of the neo-Hindu concept, the neo-Hindu school. There's also this, from the medieval ages and from the ancient ages, you have the Bhakti movement. I mean, from the medieval ages, you
Right.
have these poet seers. Then you have the Sangam literary corpus in Tamil Nadu, like in the south, you have the
Mm-hmm.
Sangam literary corpus, those texts that detail you, like they are actually historical fictions, but they tell you a lot about the cultural background. As I said, it acts as, cultural mirror to the past. And which is why I feel I can inculcate a lot among into me if I study through the ancient Indian texts. Like if you are studying the Sangam literary texts, I would just like to name one literary text here, like Sila Paddikaram by Ilango Adingal, for example, and then proceeding on to Manimekalai, which talks about a Tamil noble, called Kovalan, and his wife, and then there's this chaste woman, his wife, who's called Kannagi. So Kannadi was actually worshipped like a goddess, like a chaste goddess of chastity by the Cheras and the Cholas alike. So what I feel I can learn from here is, the basic administrative structure that was followed in South India. So these are very important points when you're
Right.
talking about civil service, even if that be a foreign service. And in these particular texts, for example, in South India, if you look at it in detail, you'd find a word called Yavanapriyam, and Yavanapriya basically denotes black pepper. So black pepper was something that used to be, exported from India to those Greek countries, and also to, from South Asia, which is why, and they liked it, in fact, and which is why they called it Yavana Priya. So it's basically like Priya, something that is Priya to the Greeks, like something that is a favorite of the Greeks. So well, so which is why I think, like, if you read through ancient India, if you read through this original text, like whatever you learn in India today, everything is actually an evolutionary doctrine. I mean, an evolutionary. It has been evolved. It has evolved to its present form from the past. Like every literary text that you read today is an evolved form of its past image. As Jai Shankar once again quote, I'm just bringing him back in the the discussion. So since India, as he said, is a prisoner of its past image, I think it is very important to learn the India's past, because everything in India you see today, even if you're talking about defense technology, most of these are named after mythical gods. Like you have Arjuna missiles, you've got BrahMos, and you have so many other things named after them. You've got INS Vikramaditya. So if you know what the story about Vikramaditya is actually about, Vikramaditya being generally the name for one great, it generally translates to someone who's a great, unsinkable kind of thing. So you would understand what the particular role of that ship which has been built to guard the waters of your country is actually about. So so indirectly or
Right.
directly, I would say that there's a lot to learn from the past, and there's a lot to apply in whichever field that be. So even if you go for history, even if you be a professor, even if you go for into the literary world, like even if you be a professional author like Devdutt Patnaik or Amish Tripathi, you have got to learn from your past. Whatever you are aspiring for, past is the only way for you to like develop your own ideas. Like without the past, you are like nothing. So you, without your foundations, you are like a tree without no roots, and we all know that a tree without roots is not a tree at all. So yeah, that is it. I mean, so that is what I think is about applying what I learned from these ancient texts and the medieval texts into my service. So yeah.
Right. So again, so this second part of the being that, so what would any one or two steps which you would actually apply in the whichever industry you venture into?
Yeah. Okay. So, see, I told you earlier about these two books, which is why I was actually talking about these, like Arthashastra and Niti Sara. So, these books are not, to be very honest, although these books can be considered to be cultural mirrors of their past, they are not simply historical in nature. These books have a universal value. They have this universal appeal within themselves. Like Chanakya's Arthashastra is even relevant today, the way it was relevant 100 years ago, or maybe 3 centuries ago. So once you are learning these, you know what etiquettes are to be followed. If you ask about my favorite part, I think Niti Sara's, the diplomatic capabilities that a person should have, like for example, wonderful communication, a knowledge of their past, a knowledge of the military tactics that used to be followed in their country in the past. For example, I'll tell you about a military strategy India, and a diplomatic strategy as well, that India has always followed is India never conquers, India never invades a foreign territory by itself, and it never, and it never allows a foreign country to just come in and invade and just get away with the territory of, to get away with a portion of your territory. So that is India's diplomacy. We are where we are. So we are within the realms of Munjavat. I mean, within the realms of Himalayas mountains, as said by Megasthenes, or Himalayas. So we are still within the realms of the Himalayas. Now let's take that partition part out of this chapter, since that was something which was like masterminded by the British and not by the Indians. So the Indians who had the knowledge of their past would not go into such kind of theories. They would not actually want to divide their country into some portions as such. But what I feel is most interesting, as you said, is when you are having a knowledge of your past, you know how to better your future. You know where India has lacked in the past. You know where there are loopholes, and you want not let those, happen in the past again. For example, you know how the Gurukula kind of system works. So for example, Nalanda University, I think it is being revived by the Indian government once again in the ancient learning standards. It was started from 2014. So it will be, it will be reopening back again, and the government hopes to develop it to one of the best universities in the in the entirety of Asia. And I think that is possible, and I think that's verily possible. If you actually have an idea of how the university used to work, university used to work like 800 to 900 years back, when it was actually like destroyed. I mean, not 800 years back, it's actually kind of 1200. Yeah, 1000. Take it for example, 1000. This is Bhaktiya Khilji who destroyed Nalanda, Udantapuri, and Vikramashila. So yeah, 1 millennia back. So if you know how the university used to work, if you know how the teachings used to be, performed by those teachers, and if you know what philosophies used to be, what philosophical doctrines used to be followed in this particular university in the ancient times, those texts that people wrote, those, the cultural diplomacy that they undertook. For example, Atis Dipankar, who's a scholar from Nalanda University, went to spread Buddhism in Tibet and China and in Southeast Asia as well. So there you get this, there you get this motive of yours opening a university. You are here to train your people. You're here to train your next generation. In the process, the next generation in the past had been trained like. So we are here today because of our past. Like, we would have been nothing if, such great scholars like India owes everything to its literary scholars. Like, Indian philosophers are regarded to be one of the best in the entire world. I'll just tell you about Alexander's opinions on the same. Like, Alexander was this Greek Macedonian king who invaded India, as you all know, in 323, kind of BCE. And his regiment was led, his phalanx was led by two of his greatest commanders, Strabo and Aryan. And when they went back, they wrote this book called Anabasis of Alexander, where they have talked about Calanus, who is an ancient Indian sage. Usually, in the Indian terms, it transliterated to Kalyana. And there's also Dandamis. Dandamis is another sage. And Alexander says that their philosophies are so, valid. Like, they know what is rational justification. Like, to be very honest, I would not like to demean any particular civilization or something as such. But when India had been, dancing above cloud nine, when India was so advanced in terms of its literary capabilities, philosophical capabilities, and polity, the other nations very lagged behind. But as Al-Biruni said, this development had been paused by the rigidity that was brought into the society by the Brahmanas, who used to think that all knowledge that you have within yourself is to be kept isolated and within yourself. You're not going to disperse that knowledge to anyone. So that is completely very foolish, to be very honest. Like, when you have certain knowledge, you want to disperse it to the society for the betterment of the society, for the upliftment of other people. Like, if you isolate it to yourself, you you actually halt the progress of your society. You halt the will of progress of your society, however knowledgeable or however learned you might actually be in the literary terms. So yeah, that is what I think about the question Amir asked.
Wow. And every time you answer, I am spellbound, man. I feel like you should take classes or something for BA students who are majoring in history now.
Thank you so much. This was it was a privilege for me to be here today talking to you guys about this. Like, I feel so enthusiastic about talking, about these particular philosophical laws and polity and administration of the ancient and the medieval Indian age. Because, to be very honest, there are certain discrepancies that exist within the society today. Like, people do not exactly know how these texts had been written. Like Amia said this sometime earlier. They only, infer what they have actually thought about in their own opinion, and they just give an opinion based on the same. Like, many columns I have seen in newspapers, they have certain incorrect statements within them that I think are completely incorrect, to be very honest, and these might in fact harm the civilization if we continue to upheave them in the manner we are doing. So yeah.
Right.
So one last question.
Yeah.
Amit, please.
Please ask.
Okay. So I was just going to ask that. So when you say that we often misinterpret our own scriptures and Upanishads and Shrutis, Smritis, Dharma Shastras, So, do you think that in the present era there has been an anglicization and westernization of the entire concept of tradition that we follow? So, what I mean by that is, in even in BA, when we were taught, say, philosophy or political science, we were only taught Saptang theory by Chanakya, and rest we were taught the Prince by Machiavelli. Whereas the whatever is written in the Prince is an exact reflection of what you told in Niti Sir. So, do you think that there is this?
Right. See, actually, what you
Do you
refer
think
to
that
as
there is
westernization. Yeah, so what you actually refer to as westernization. So I verily feel that this has started like intermingling with the Indian cultural forms and the Indian cultural beliefs ever since Alexander invaded India. So we have seen Megasthenes in his book Indica. So westernization is actually the process of intermingling of the Eastern or the Oriental beliefs with the Occidental beliefs. So what the Occidental philosophers think. Now, when you're talking about the discrepancies, I feel that now studying Prince by Machiavelli won't do you much harm, because when you're talking
Hmm.
about diplomacy, you have to have an idea of an internationalized concept. Like you have to have an idea of how diplomacy used to be followed in those those kingdoms. I mean, in Italy and in France and in Germany and in Britannia, and how the Roman Empire used to work. Like, because we have seen there's a lot of trade relation between the Cholas and the Cheras and the Roman Empire, in fact. So if you try to stop that westernization, it would actually lead us to being isolated and quarantined within our own selves. So that would not actually help. But what I feel the major discrepancy is, I will just bring out an illustration of this very famous film called Avengers. Film
Hmm.
series. So honestly, I haven't seen Avengers. I do not know whether the society will accept me or not, because I haven't seen Avengers. But I've
Good,
heard
good.
about these characters. This Thor. So what I was saying is basically, when these historical fiction cinemas like Avengers and others, these are basically imaginative in concept. When they are created by a sudden screenwriter or a producer who's got no idea of the original classical text or the original characteristics of these characters like Thor and Loki, who are being who are being dragged into the films, you will find that there's this discrepancy that arises. For example, talking about the Indian context, colonial historians, like as Gandhiji said it, colonial historians often misinterpreted various versions of the Indian history and tried to portray it. For example, in the school texts during the colonial times, you would often see there is a version that tells that in the Hindu states, in fact, there's a version that would say that this ruler is very cruel to his population, and that he is actually not looking after the Muslim majority correctly. I mean, not doing welfare for the Muslim minority sections of the society.
Right.
And similarly, in the provinces, for example, in Oudh, which was a Muslim majority province, and where the Nawab was actually from the different faith, from that faith, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, he was actually alleged of misrule, within quotations, misrule, as said by Lord Dalhousie and then by his successor Lord Canning, and for that purpose he was replaced. Like, so students are being taught this, in educational institutions and in everywhere they go. Like, this is what is printed out in the books, and which is why Gandhiji actually said that so long as we're going to study this various, this varied, we're not going to actually perceive what our history is like. We're actually going to misunderstand it. So this is what I think is most appropriate, a very appropriate quote, in this context.
Right, right. Wonderful. So, I mean, we
Uh,
have taken a
has Amir joined us?
yeah. Amay, I guess he's also facing some technical issues. He's not visible. So
Yeah.
if Amay is not knowing, then Amay, you are not visible. Okay, but fine. So, I mean, that was it. We are done with all our questions as of now, and it was
Yeah.
it was like a music to my ears. Yeah. Amay, you are visible.
Yeah. Hi, Amir.
Am I audible?
Welcome back.
Am I
Yeah,
audible?
sure. We can hear you.
Oh,
I can hear
great,
you.
great. So, yes. So I wanted to ask one last question. So you mentioned that Indian foreign policy is that we won't go outside our own land, But if some country ventures into our land, then we won't spare them, right? So we have seen this against
Right.
China in the Galwan Valley incident. So, but
Mhm.
don't you think that, if we keep, if we be restricted to our own land, and if, we let other enemies to kind of come into our land, so, don't we also need to go into their land and, show some hard power,
Okay.
and
So
not
you're talking
merely,
about the military diplomacy
rely
that,
on soft power.
yeah,
Hmm.
Right.
yeah.
So again,
So,
one more thing is that soft, please. So sorry to interrupt, but so what I mean
no,
to
it's
say
fine.
is, so Indian foreign policy has been reliant on soft power, right? So don't you think that there should be a hard power in addition to that soft power?
See, if you ask me, as you said rightly, India's policy is basically based on two different kinds of things. If you look at it carefully, like India never invades a foreign territory. First actually, and the second is that when some foreign territory, for example, as you said, China in the Galwan Valley incident, and also in the Doklam Pass in Arunachal Pradesh incident that happened in 2017, I guess, when
Right.
they try to intrude into our territory, we actually push them back. So this is what the Indian foreign policy has been basically based on. For example, India never declares war by its own self. First, Pakistan, in the Indo-Pak wars that have happened until yet, so they destroy certain bases or certain airports, airfields in India, and which is when India actually retaliates back. And that retaliation is often taken to be war, or interestingly, in the Sino-Indian War of 1962, we do not call it a war because neither India nor China actually declared war on each other. It was a form of aggression, and that can be referred to as a conflict. So, which is why we call Sino-Indian conflict of 1962 and not Sino-Indian War of 1962. Since war has to be declared, like in World War, we have countries officially declaring war on one another. Now, if you're talking that, if you're asking me about the hard power diplomacy, does India require hard power diplomacy or not? I would say not. Like in the present context, especially, India is a major economic superpower. So when soft power diplomacy basically fails, you have other options in the international, in the globalized diplomatic scale today. You can impose economic embargo on that nation, as in India is a major trading partner of China. So whenever China, they try to intrude somewhat into the Indian territory, ban China or ban Chinese product. These things trend on Twitter and on all other major social media applications. So we've also seen these Atmanirbhar apps like Koo and Twitter. They have come out to replace Twitter. In fact, that is a US application. So so this is what I think Indian diplomacy is about. You are going to show your power to the people not by generally attacking them, because what I feel is, whether it be a conflict or a war, it can be resolved by peaceful means. Like there's no need for an outrageous battle where civilians are going to be affected, and many are going to be killed. Like soldiers are going to be martyred for their country. Like why just waste time and money both on useless battles that actually give you no result. For example, if you talk about hard power diplomacy in the present context, US is a unilateral country. Let's take it for example as well. US is a unilateral country, but various policies of the US have been often reversed or often repulsed by the Indian NAM, that is the non-alignment movement. I mean, the non-alignment group that India actually leads. So it was our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru who envisaged this NAM, and he formed it with his colleagues from various other states. Like there was the Chinese PM of that point of time as well. Like there was Chu Enlai from China, who actually signed up this mutual non-aggression treaty called Panchsheel, and later Dashsheel with India at the Bandung conference, before the Bandung conference, and it was officially transferred Dashsheel in the Bandung conference. Nevertheless, talking about hard power diplomacy, I feel it's, as I said earlier, it's a waste of energy and a waste of resources on both countries' parts. Since even if you conquer a part of the territory, even if you suppose India attacks Nepal tomorrow, so it conquers a half of Nepal, it conquers southern Nepal, in fact. But tomorrow you will be forced to give that back to Nepal, since the laws prescribed internationally are such. So when a country is performing, when a country is showing gunboat diplomacy or hard power diplomacy on another country, I think that is a very foolish, aggressive part on that country, because then it is going to be isolated. For example, if you talk about China, you can already see how isolated it has become in the current scenario. Like after the COVID pandemic, especially, China has been kind of isolated from the international relations. I mean, the international diplomacy, after US Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she declared to boycott China in the upcoming Olympic Games, or somewhat as such. But yeah, that is what I feel. So India does not necessarily need to display its hard power policy, because even if it does, that would only lead to greater loss of expenditure and resources on our own part, and resultant and the resultant devastation of civilians, mass killing, in fact, in various portions where you would declare war. And at the end of the day, what you have to do is you have to return that back to the nation you have acquired it from, because that is what the United Nations is prescribed as the international standard for diplomacy. And I feel it is always best to go by what the international conventions have been made like. Because if you, as I said, in the case of China, if you try to violate those, you'll be declared an aggressor, and you'll violate the terms of the treaty that have been so wonderfully accepted by all the countries, all the signatory countries of the United Nations. And that is not what I would want India to do. So yeah, that is what.
Great. I mean, that was such a robust answer you gave. I mean, so multifaceted
Thank
answer
you.
you gave. So, I mean, I think that's enough to answer my doubt.
Right.
Thank you. I hope
I
so.
guess
I
with
could
that,
I could help you.
that we also.
Yeah.
Oh man, you have. I mean, this conversation, if someone can make it into a transcript, it is worth 5 chapters of an history textbook. We have covered everything from ancient India, foreign diplomacy, modern examples of Avengers. Everything has been encapsulated in this one conversation, and
So try to
I,
summarize
I,
it as
I
much as
can
possible.
sense that you have immense knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have, and you have done it like very elaborately, very eloquently, and very in a very streamlined fashion. So I
I'm
mean,
so
I am
glad to
I am
hear
in
that.
awe of whatever you. Oh man, like you have done it. There's no false adulation that I am giving it, but it was so much fun to converse with you, and great learning experience.
Likewise.
Actually I had to change my room. For some reason I had to change
Yeah.
my room. Otherwise, I had taken notes while you were speaking, so I could have shown refer to that while asking some questions, because it was so much for me to process. It was great. It was great. I hope Amay, you have the same feeling.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you for having me here, on Law Unplugged. It was really great conversing with you on my part as well. Like the questions were really, brilliantly crafted, and they actually helped me explore these horizons. Like often you go to a podcast, they ask you very simple questions like how did you start and what books did you read, and they limit themselves to that. So that is the best part of your podcast. I mean, of your show, I
Mm-hmm.
feel.
Yeah. I mean, we are
We
honored
are
to hear
glad to
that.
hear that
So,
coming it from you. Yeah, right. Right.